Alright, so if you're driving around and you're hearing an awful growling or whirring sound that kind of sounds like your brakes are sticking, that could mean that you have a bad wheel bearing. So today I'm going to show you how to diagnose a bad wheel bearing and how to fix it on a late 90s Chevy Silverado. If you do have one of these trucks, you really lucked out because wheel bearings on these things are a piece of cake and it should only take you about a half an hour to do. Alright, so right here I have the good wheel bearing side jacked up. This is what a good wheel bearing should look like. It spins for the most part. You want to grab it on the top and bottom and you want to push back and forth. And you can see on the good side there's absolutely no movement, there's no play, and that means that you have a good wheel bearing. Alright, so now we're on the other side, and this is the side that the growling sound was coming from when I was driving down the road. And you can see it doesn't sound too bad right there when you just spin it, but you can tell that it stops spinning a lot more suddenly, like there's a lot more friction inside there. And I'll do the same thing on this side as I did on the other. And all this movement right here is all in the steering, so that's not a big deal, but you can definitely tell there's something wrong. So then grab the top and bottom, and that's really bad. Usually they won't move this much, or you won't be able to hear them this much. But hopefully that shows up on the video, and you'll actually be able to see how much it's moving. And that's a telltale sign that you have a bad wheel bearing. So I'm going to pull this tire off, and then we'll get started. Alright, so the first step after you take the wheel off is to break loose your axle nut. That's this right here. That's a 35 millimeter. What the main goal is to get your caliper and your rotor out of the way so that you can take the hub off. The hub is what has the lugs and also the wheel bearing inside of it. So take your 3/8 female socket or reverse socket, and you get that around here to loosen up the bolts for your caliper. Alright, once you pull your two caliper bolts out, you give this thing a wiggle and it should pop off. And you can use a hammer and tap on it lightly if you have to. But with this, just set it up here out of the way. You don't want to let it hang off of this brake line. And then the caliper just slides right off. And while you have all these things apart, it's a good idea to check your rotor for wear. And also look at your brake pads, see if they need replacing. Because if they do, you might as well replace them now while you have everything apart. Now this right here is the hub that we're going to be pulling out. And this is why we loosened up this axle nut before. And if you run into a problem like this, where you still can't loosen that nut without this spinning, you can get a bar or something in there to hold like this and give yourself leverage against yourself there. After you remove your axle nut, what you got to do next is remove these 3 bolts inside these 3 holes here. When you do that, just kind of keep in mind where this shield is right here, because that has to go back in the same spot with the new hub. Anyway, these are 5/8 inch bolts. Or no, I'm sorry. These are 15 millimeters. A 5/8 will strip them out and they'll slip. So 15 millimeter bolts. I would spray them down real good with some WD-40 or some type of penetrating oil because they're going to be pretty stuck on there. So yeah, we'll break these loose next. Alright, 3 bolts are off. Just remember where your heat shield goes. And now it's time to remove the hub. Alright, looking down at the top of your hub, there's this line right here, and that's your ABS sensor. To remove that off the hub, just take a 3/16 Allen wrench, or one of these. And you just pull it out and set it aside. A lot of the times you can just pull and wiggle on it back and forth. If you have to, you can use a hammer or a big beefy socket and tap it out on each side. But this thing's actually coming out pretty easy, and you just wiggle and pull it right out. Now you're going to have this washer inside of here. You need to keep that. And inside there is the bad wheel bearing. Alright, here's the old hub and the new hub. These things always come pre-packed. You don't have to pack the bearings. They come with all the grease that they need. Alrighty, so now what you want to do is take a clean rag and just clean off the threads of your shaft there. And you're going to want to keep that really clean, because when you put your hub back on, you're going to use a little bit of anti-seize so it doesn't rust together. But now it's time to put the new hub on. And it's pretty straightforward. It'll slide right onto these splines. Just keep in mind where your ABS sensor goes. And you want to make sure that you don't touch it around there. And also try not to touch the actual sensor too much, because if it gets dirty, it can ruin the sensor. So you'll slide this right onto the splines, just like that. Then you want to take your heat shield and install that in between right there. And this is all pretty straightforward. Everything goes back together exactly how it came off. Now with your 3 hub mounting bolts, you want to take a little bit of Loctite or thread lock, and just get some on these bolts, because you don't want these to come loose. So, and you don't have to put a ton on there, just enough to seal her good. There you go. So then you take your 15mm socket and tighten these down. Not all the way for now though. Alright, we'll just get a little snug for now, and then repeat that process with the other 2 bolts. Alrighty, once you get all 3 of your mounting bolts on there, you can grab your bigger socket or your bigger wrench. And you'll really want to tighten these down. There's no specific torque for these, but you just want to snug them up real good. Next, you want to get your washer and slide that back in there. And then take some anti-seize, and you just want to coat the end of your spindle shaft there in anti-seize. And you can't really use too much of this stuff. And then take your axle nut, which I still have inside of there, and you just thread this on. Alright, so once you get your nut on there, every axle nut has a very specific torque specification that you have to follow, because if this is too tight, it's going to crush your new bearing inside of there, and it's just going to be bad. And if it's not tight enough, it'll leave room in there for play, and then your bearing is going to wear out prematurely. So you want to make sure you have the exact torque spec for your vehicle. There's a really cool website where you punch in the year, make, model, and it'll tell you what the torque spec is for your axle nuts. So I'll put a link to that in this video somewhere, so that way you guys can use it for your own vehicles. But yeah, for my 97 Silverado, the torque spec is 165 foot-pounds. So got my torque wrench, and that's what I'm going to work up to. I'll start off at 75. There we go. And then from 75 foot-pounds, I'll just slowly work my way up to 165. And I'm going to keep doing this in about 10 to 20 pound intervals until I get up to 165, and that'll be my final torque. Alright, I got my axle nut torqued down to 165 foot-pounds. So now all that's left is to put my rotor back on. It just slides right on. And then usually what I do is just put a couple of lug nuts on there, just to keep it from moving while I'm trying to get the caliper on. While you're putting the caliper bolts in, some people put Loctite on there, you know, some people put anti-seize, but honestly I've never put those on there, and mine have always been just fine, so it's really personal preference. Alright, after you get your brake system all back together, you grab your wheel, throw that back on. I don't have all my lug nuts in all the way yet, and they're just hand tight, and I just wanted to show you the same test we used at the beginning of this video. It is solid. So that shows that the wobbling was because of the bad wheel bearing, so that part's fixed. Now I'm going to finish this up, tighten everything down, and go for a test drive. Make sure that everything sounds and feels good. And yeah, we're pretty much done. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If it helped you out, please leave a like. If you want to see more from Midwest Garage, please subscribe. And thanks. I'll see you guys next week.